Okay, welcome to tonight's webinar in association with Rebel Coaching, the underage section of Cork GA. Tonight's webinar will be available to listen in podcast form tomorrow morning on rebelcoaching.com, as well as the video that you're watching now. So Ed, thanks very much for joining us. We're joined by Ed Coughlan from, you got all your credentials there in front of us. Do you want to give a quick background on what got you to this stage, Ed?
Yeah, very quickly, I suppose my work is I'm a lecturer in the sports science side of the house of the sport, leisure and childhood studies department in Cork Institute of Technology. I've been coaching for, I'm 46 now, probably over 30 years at this stage, and in a variety of things. And then at about probably over 15 years ago, I started, from all the coaching I had been doing, I began to find myself in high performance environments, and I've pretty much been fortunate enough to stay in that space since. So I've done a lot of work at the Olympic level with athletes in a variety of different things and a variety of different sports across kind of world and European kind of standard things. I've also been very fortunate to be involved in the GA at a senior intercounty and hurling and football and club hurling and football. So, but my day job is in CIT, and my work that I do when I'm not in CIT is coaching. I'm back volunteer coaching with my boys clubs, my two young boys, it was 7 and 11. So in their football and the hurling and the soccer and whatever else. So when I'm at home, I'm probably doing a bit of that stuff with them. And my main work, when as I said, the stuff I do right now, but in more recent years, I work with professional golfers. Seems to be the majority of my work nowadays. I work with them as a practice coach. I challenge the work that they do and how they do it. I work with their coaches within their team, let's say their swing coaches and so on and so forth, and to ensure that what they do will transfer. To ensure that whatever they're doing in their training, their practice, is actually relevant to the game of golf and relevant to where they are competing. And for me, that's pretty much on the European tour or some of the satellite tours like the Challenge Tour and the like. So everything I do pretty much comes back down to, does this happen in the game? And if it's not, stop doing it. You need to try and increase the likelihood of whatever you're doing actually transferring to the live setting. And
could you just give me an example of that for a juvenile coach? What do you mean by that?
I think a lot of, and it's some of the things we'll show here. I think some of the times, I think sometimes we forget who we have in front of us, and we kind of get caught. And that's a great question, even around a juvenile coach. We think of the full game sometimes, and what we see, and very often what we see is at the elite level. We watch Cork in the hurling and football, and we watch them playing against Kerry and the Kilkennys and the Tips. But that's not the game then that you're playing at 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 years of age. So it is about trying to adjust the lens as a coach. Well, what is the game that they're playing? You know, it's not about the incredible shots from way outside and so on and so forth. It's actually about maybe just developing some basics around the game and a fun and enjoyment of the game. So coach that space, coach that level. And where they're at, that age and stage. And very often I see a bit of a mismatch. I see kids coming to training where the training is extremely structured, and it's training that it's beyond them, and it's very ordered, very structured, it's very dictated and very run by almost a militaristic type of an approach, you know. And I always say to people, if an alien came down and watched a training session and then watched a game the next day, they should be able to say, you know, they're the exact same, as opposed to, well, last time was very different to what you're doing now in a game. And very often, you know, you might say, well, where? And you say, well, the end part of your session was very like what you're doing today, but the rest of it didn't look like it at all. Yeah. And I think a lot of what I do. So even in professional golf, that's what I do. What are you doing in the range? I'm doing this. Okay, but why? Would that ever happen in the game? No, but I'm doing this. Well, if not, well, why? And if there is a strong rationale for it, great, then let's go after it. But my work gets exciting when I know there's not a strong rationale behind it. And that's when then I go after it a bit more, you know? So
okay. Excellent analogy about the alien too. I'm going to rob that from you.
Rob away. So yeah, I suppose with that in mind tonight, it was just, you know, from chatting with you and the emails coming up, it was just that idea of, well, maybe less coaching it can actually lead to better coaching. And that's speaking from my own experience, but again, as you'll see later on, the resources I've put up here, there's a huge amount of evidence behind everything I'll say. Everything I will talk about tonight yes, it's personal experience, but my personal experience is heavily influenced by what the evidence and the research tells us about how to be more effective in our coaching. And more effective coaches actually spend a lot less time doing what traditionally we thought coaching was, which is talking all the time, telling them what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And my coaching certainly over the last 15 years is unrecognizable to the coaching that I was doing for the 15 years before that. Unrecognizable. And I'd hope maybe 15 years from now, it will be almost unrecognizable again from where it is now. I think it needs to, I'm always working on doing less in coaching to try and get more out of the way as often as possible, So I kick on if that's okay.
Just as I do with any talk that I give like this, it's always just to put it out there for me. This is not about a teach and a preach type approach. That's not with my philosophy at all. However, I will say that everything I do speak to tonight is backed by evidence, and my philosophy is heavily influenced by the evidence from sports science and coaching science research. So not about teach and preach, but much more about a chat and a challenge. I'm really interested in putting things out there tonight that maybe hopefully will be somewhat provocative and make you sit uncomfortably in your chair if you're listening in, and to challenge what you're currently doing. At the end, my details will be at the end, and I do that because I am interested in that chat and challenge. I am interested in that engagement interaction from fellow coaches, because I think I learn a huge amount when I chat with coaches, and I like that. Maybe that's a selfish part of it for me. I get a lot from it when I chat with coaches. So much more about a chat and challenge for the next short while. So a little few things just to get the mind thinking. For me, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And I think it's a stark quote, but I think it is something that we need to remind ourselves of more often. That I think we need to do better. And I'm speaking as a volunteer coach, as a dad with my boys, but also when I'm working with professional athletes, I see a lot of things that I'm being challenged to do right by, because of maybe some things that were not done right by for the athletes in their past. And I think we need to be better for how we coach people at their younger age and stage of their development. Also, with that in mind, I think this is an important thing to remind us of the Bill of Rights for kids in sport. I think it's a key thing that we need to constantly remind ourselves about. And I've underlined some things here about participation in sport, about how each child's maturity and ability needs to be taken into consideration, about being qualified. And I think we need to be careful about the qualification certification in coaching, because very often we've got coaches who will do a foundation level and may go on to do a level 1, and then and then the stats tell us that their coach education stops there. We need people to continue to engage in upskilling and and keeping themselves certified and improving on their qualifications if you're going to be putting yourself in front of athletes, young or old. To play as a child, to share in the leadership and decision making. This is a huge thing that I see is not happening. This is not happening often enough, that we're not asking children enough about what they'd like to do, and what would they like to see in their session tonight, and what would they like to have as a theme for the evening, and so on and so forth. We don't do that enough. We need to. And again, this is a legal document, so this work has led into the UN Charter for Children, and so on and so forth. The right to participate in safe and healthy environments, proper preparation. Again, that speaks to that communication with coaches and between coaches of other sports. What have your kids done before they've come to you in that evening? Have they had a swimming session and a tennis session and a football session and a rugby session, and then they come to you for a hurling session and you just pray and train them without consideration? I see a lot of that happening still, unfortunately. A right to equal opportunity. And I think that's a huge part that we need to get better at. It's something that we're looking at in Cork Institute of Technology with Kevin Murray, the research he's doing with the Rebel Oak. We're looking at that ability to provide greater opportunity for children, and when they come into the Rebel Oak Academy, and then to be treated with dignity. Again, unfortunately, this is something that I'm not seeing enough of, and again, I'd say that I'm seeing a lot of the way I was as a coach, as a younger coach, still happening, where we speak down to the kids and even the adults and whatever. The relationship very often is not one of respect. And there's, of course, there's great stuff going on out there, but there shouldn't ever be a situation where a child is being mistreated or disrespected, or they feel that they're not being treated with dignity. And finally, of course, that right to have fun. And I think these, again, is just to place some of the discussion I'll be having later on. The next part is this mind-body continuum, this idea about these differences. And again, I'm just throwing some ideas out initially. This idea about the difference between careless, careful, and carefree. If a training session is being developed with a careless approach, or if the kids are being careless, well, then it has no process and there's no responsibility, and there's nothing that you can actually hold on to. Careful is probably then in the other sense. It's worried about the result. It's tense. It's tight, but it's also overbearing. And like anything with that word of being overly careful, that final word, that carefree, for me is where so much good stuff can emerge in the coaching space. Is the mind and body attuned to the task? If what we're doing is right, and the kids and the adults doing it are carefree, well, then there's a different focus that comes to it. So I'm often asked by coaches, "Oh, Ed, what do you do with the difficult kids? And what do you do when the kids kind of run, go a bit crazy and go a bit mad, and their attention span is gone?" And I would say, well, I generally don't do anything with the kids. I do a lot with the coach, because that's them telling you that what you're doing is not working. And what you're doing right now has lost their attention. For whatever reason, you've done it too long. It's not appropriate. It's too difficult, and so on and so forth. But if it's the right task, and they're given that space to be carefree in there, I think, again, wonderful things can happen with everybody, but especially in that younger age group and the kind of the people we're speaking to tonight. So this is something that I've kind of come about over the last while, and it's as a result of lockdown, and nobody has been involved in more webinars than me, but probably some people have. But I have a small concern about what's going to happen when we come out of lockdown, and I was delighted, absolutely delighted, to see the webinars that were coming out, and from you guys at the Rebel Oak Academy, but also from across the world. It was incredible, the opportunity we were all having to tune in and connect with coaches from all over the world with different experiences, what they were doing, and so on and so forth. But I also felt there was a little bit of, I'm just signing up to everything, and I'm going to listen to every single webinar, and my day is going to be filled from one webinar to the next. And I'm not too sure if there was enough, because, and the reason this is coming about more recently is that I'm hearing people talking about going back coaching. And when I ask them, well, what are you going to do now with all the stuff that you've learned from all the webinars you've been on? And they're like, well, yeah, I'm not too sure, we'll see. I don't know. And you're like, oh, how are you not? And I suppose I was challenging them. How are you not really amped up to try so much of what you've taken in? And I think sometimes we can get lost in the CPD and just be doing it as a tick the box thing. And I suppose that's a little personal thing, and just to flag that, it's really important to engage in webinars and workshops, but make sure you're going there with the space of, this is going to improve what I do. And I'm going to take at least one thing from this. If there's more, great, but I'm going to take this one thing and it's going to impact how I coach. And if it doesn't, well, then you got to let them know too that, that was a huge waste of time. But I think we just need to be careful. How are we going to transition back out of lockdown from all the webinars we've seen and all the webinars we've done? So with that in mind, perspective is a key for me when we're working with young people. I think the perspective that we think as coaches, like these parents now looking down at their kid in the cot, the perspective they see is very different to the perspective that the kid actually sees in the cot. And the parents are looking at a lovely mobile overhead, and that's really cute with these 4 animals, but from the child's perspective it looks very different. I'm looking up at the bottom of four wild animals, and it's it's something to remind us constantly that if we're not looking at a training session, a coaching session, a match, and so on and so forth, through the lens of the people we're working for, working with, we're missing a trick. And I think the more we can actually get into their frame of mind, the more we can try to see things through their lens, the more it will impact our coaching in a way that we maybe won't coach in the same way, but we also may not coach as much in the same way, because we'll realize about what they're taking from that session or that match and so on and so forth. But so perspective for me is huge, to remind me constantly to look, to try and see it through the lens of the people that I'm coaching. So with that in mind, there's a series of little quotes that I'm going to go through and to try to take me to things. So the need for certainty is the greatest disease the mind faces. And what this says to me is, if we're going into coaching and we feel we have to have certain things, they have to be there, and the session won't work unless this happens and that happens, and we have a very real checklist approach to our coaching, I think we can again get taken away from the essence of what we're actually there to do. And be that, let's say for you guys in the Rebel Oak, those 14, 15, 16-year-olds, these kids, they're at a hugely important time in their lives and their development, and and a lot of them are involved in a huge amount of other things. So their expectation is very different to the expectation of the coach. But very often the coach is thinking maybe too far ahead, which brings in this certainty. I need them to be able to do this by this age. They need to be able to do this by the time they leave this group. We have to make sure. And I think all those certainty type quotes can be quite troublesome for a coach, and even more troublesome for the athlete, because I think we need to remove that sense of certainty, especially when we're working with young people, and be a bit more patient for what they may interact and engage in with the session. Error correction is the athlete's job, not the coach's job. This is something that I know over time has been a struggle for me, but also other coaches that I've spoken to, because coaches very often see, well, my job is to fix. They're not doing it right, so my job is to go in and tell them how to do it, when to do it, and in what way I think it should be done. And I fundamentally disagree with that. I didn't always. In my earlier days of coaching, I probably didn't always, but I certainly do now. And there's some lovely evidence to suggest, to show us the importance of engaging with the players' decision making, the players' problem solving, the players' input and autonomy into what they get out of a session. So for me, yes, error correction is the athlete's job, not the coach's job. My job is to facilitate them getting a solution to the problem, but it is not to give them the solution. So with this in mind, I'm going to show a video around that idea as far as error correction, and it's if I can, yes, lovely. So we just watch this little kid here. Good job. So he gets to home base, ball comes back, the dog gives it back. And for this kid, I don't know where he's from. It might be, somewhere outside Boston, so Fenway Park, or I don't know. But he feels like he's in it. He's picking up a bit of dirt. He's modeling somebody he maybe saw on the telly, or his dad, or someone else. The action that he's doing is just lovely, but he's in it. Safe or out? So his dad just asked him, are you safe or out? And he said, out. So even in his own game, playing against his dog, this kid was well able to simulate a match situation. He was in it. And again, it's only a snapshot, so we have no idea what the rest of their relationship is about. But I love it as a snapshot of just letting the kid be a kid and just asking the question, are you safe or out? Out. You know, got to go again, got to try again. You know, the dog was really quick that time. And again, it might be a dog, but in his mind's eye, that's not a dog. That's a brilliant outfielder who's making that run to throw that ball back and so on and so forth. And I don't know, do we do enough of that, you know, creating that environment where kids, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, are allowed to have their imaginations go crazy with them. The kind of stuff that I would have done growing up in Cork. Out in the road, it was All-Ireland final day when you were playing the back garden. It was, and in the middle of summer, you know what? It was a piece of rope going across the road because it was the Wimbledon final. And later on in the summer, you know what? It was actually pitch and put up in Douglas because what? It was actually the British Open week. And we were all flooding into the pitch. But we were simulating, and we weren't being overly challenged because we didn't need to be. We were challenging ourselves. And I love this quote because it speaks to that, even that video. We are working to become the person we needed when we were young. When I heard that quote from John Kessel on that podcast with Stuart Armstrong, I was like, that's just hit the nail on the head for me. That idea of, can I just stop myself just for a moment and realize I'm an adult coaching a young person here. I need to get closer to them rather than getting them closer to me. What is it that I would have wished to have had as a coach when I was their age? And let me see if I can get to that place for them. Not so much for me, but for them. And I think it's an important quote in that process. The last part, I think, is this another quote from Rick Shuttleworth. The learning movement skills is not a process of repeating a solution. It is repeating the process of finding a solution. And again, this speaks to some of the things we've said already. It's just a different way of saying it. But again, as far as if I'm trying to figure something out on the pitch, I'm not asking the players to figure it out in a very rigid way. I'm not asking them to find the solution and then repeat that solution over and over again. No. For me, it's not a process of repeating a solution. For me, Gaelic football and hurling and all sport, it's about actually repeating the process of finding a solution. Can I get really good at being a problem solver? Can I get really good at being a decision maker? If I ask my kid, comes home from school and say, okay, what did you do in school today? Oh, we were doing maths. All right, what you do? Oh, we did 3 by 3 is equal to 9. And we did that 50 times. 3 by 3 is 9. 3 by 3 is 9. 3 by 3 is 9. And I was like, right. And what's 3 by 4? I was like, well, 3 by 3 is 9. So, you know, we would go ape. We'd be like, what? That's what you're doing in school? That's ridiculous. And yet we do that very often in sport. Do the same one. Now get it perfect this time. No, exactly right. No, go back. That wasn't exactly right. Your hand position there wasn't exactly the way it should be because there's a textbook position for that. There isn't, and it's nonsense. And we need to be better at allowing that space for repeating the process of finding a solution as opposed to repeating the solution. And I think that's a key part of my philosophy. But again, there's lots of evidence to support that. Here's another element and another little video around that exploration space. And again, I'm happy just to let this play out because I'd love for the parents who are the vast majority of us who are coaching our parents, and there's others who are not, but very often if you're not a parent, you probably have someone who's a young person, a niece or nephew who you know. So just watch this and ask yourself, would you let this kid do this? And if not, would you? How much would you want to interfere as they're going up the wall? And of course, I'm not suggesting this is the first time this little kid has ever been on that wall. Of course not. Their mum or dad is probably bringing them to the wall and so on and so forth. But I love the fact that there's no one telling this kid what to do. I love the fact that this kid is figuring out different handholds, different foot positions, is prepared to go back down before going back up, to try and figure it out. And yet we're still on the first step here, and there's been 5, 6, 7 different holds. No one's saying, no, pick the orange one and then put your foot on the grey one. Yeah, there's nobody doing that. And then they look back and say, hang on, is there no one going to tell me to get down here? I love what this video says about what we probably have inherently as kids, which is that idea of exploration, that idea of figuring something out. And I'm not too sure if we do this enough as coaches, especially as coaches of adolescents. I think we need to be more in the shadow to allow them explore, and that the skill of coaching should be about figuring out when to go in. That should be the problem we should be trying to solve. When do I go in and when do I stay out? No doubt a coach could have told that kid what to do to get that kid up that wall faster. Would have made them a better climber? Maybe. Unlikely though. And away we go, back down again to go again. And again, it's an interpretation, I know, but it speaks to this idea about where we're at. Because again, from a perspective, I believe if you're talking more than your players, I think you're doing it wrong. I really do, especially at that younger age. I think we need to be a lot more engaging and engaged in what they're saying to us. And I presented something similar to this a few weeks back, and someone said to me, said, "Oh yeah, but Ed, when you coach your 11-year-old and whatever else," and I was like, "Yeah," I said, "I'm looking forward to this question." I said, "Yeah, for the last few years, in fact, we've heavily handed over to them. So since probably under 9, probably somewhere through that season, under 10s, under 11s, they're now under 12s, moving into under 13s next year. Yeah, we do ask them, what do you want to do tonight? And what happened in the last game at the weekend? And is there something from that game that we should try and work on today? Okay, well, how would you set that up?" And we just step back and watch them. Okay, set it up, let's go. And then sometimes when they're saying, "Oh, it's not working," we say, "Great, figure it out." And we'll step back, figure it out. And then they may argue out some things in themselves, and we were like, let it go. Let them figure it out. And the skill then becomes, well, then when do I go in? When do I actually step in to maybe, again, perturb? Not with an answer, but maybe with a question. And there's a quote that I have for that later on. So again, the perspective element. What we say, okay, so get with a partner and practice the chest pass. Remember to keep your elbows out and step forward as you extend your arms towards your partner. And once you can pass accurately, we'll try to put it into a game. All they hear is game. We want to play a game, but we're giving them explicit instructions. I saw something only before lockdown where I saw a coach talking to a player about how to solo the ball, how to solo the football. And it was about 3 minutes of instruction about how to solo the football. And at one stage, I was like, wow, that's tough for both the coach and I genuinely empathize with the coach, but it's equally tough for the player. To solo the football does not take a 3-minute instruction, especially when the kid is, 11 years of age. The person who's instructing them is 40 years of age. So then the demonstration doesn't really connect with them. We have plenty of evidence to tell us that stretch of a demonstration from an 11-year-old, 10-year-old to a 40-year-old, they're not seeing the same thing that we think they're seeing. And yet, of course, so many instructions, and a lot of the instructions are about body parts and stuff. I just think we need to do better than that. We need to do better than that. We need to challenge ourselves to do better than that. So again, sometimes the best way to solve a complex problem is to create more problems. I love that. I love that idea. And it speaks to the theme for tonight. Better coaching may come from actually less coaching. Don't go in with solutions. Just different problems, more problems. And in fact, if they're not getting what you've set out for them, if they don't get the task, if they don't get the game, well, then there's a couple of things that's going on there. Number one, and it's probably the biggest one, it may be that it's just too difficult for them. Maybe it was a game that you saw a senior team doing or an inter-county team doing, and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to bring that to the under-12s tonight, on the under-14s, the under-15s. and I'm going to get it to do with them because it looks really good. I like the look of that. And if they're not getting it, there's a few things. Number one, you haven't given them enough time to figure it out. So you're putting your timeline on it. They should be getting it by now, based on what, I would say. And then when you go in, often it is to go in and to change it, but not to change the task, it's to change them. You start moving them around like a chessboard, like joystick coaching, they call it. And what I would normally say is, look, if the game's not working and you've given it sufficient time, maybe make it easier. Create a different problem, you know? Or if it is working and they get it very quickly, great, well, make it more challenging. Change the task a little bit, change the rule, change the dimension, something. But still stay out of the way from a coaching perspective, but just go in and manipulate the environment that little bit more. So I have some videos here of they're very common type videos around kind of drills for Gaelic football. And it's not a criticism of these. Again, people will do these, but I'm asking you to look at these with the context of what we're saying in a chat like this. Do these reflect the skills of the game? And maybe they do. And I'm not saying, and again, at the start, this is not a teach and preach. This is a chat and a challenge. Do these match what would be required in a game? And I'll play. Maybe not. I'm gonna have to adapt myself here. No. Okay, so that's not playing for me, which is fine. So what I thought what it should do if it was going to play, it was going to show a very ordered and structured drill, which is fine. And again, yes, do I have an issue with drills? I do. I'm not going to hide away from that opinion. I do. But what you would have seen is that there was a lot of repetitive skills in the exact same way. That guy in the middle with the black shorts and the red stripe down the side, he was passing, and you'd see it. He was passing in a way that is very unusual a way to pass in a game, but it was also the same way every single time, which again is very unusual in the game. So there's something about simulation, like we were saying earlier on with that little kid doing the baseball. Simulation for me needs to reflect the type of variability that you would have in a game. Simulation for me needs to also speak to being adaptable. So if what you're trying to do is simulate something from a game, well, it needs to have a component in it that require the person to be adaptable. But there's not much adaptability in a drill like this. And they need components for there to be variability. And again, there's not much variability in this. Let me see. I'll go on to the next one, and let's see. Does this one play? Yes, it does. So here's a combo passing and shooting drill. Again, make up your own mind whether this is something that happens in a game or not. The question I would ask is, does it happen with such order and structure and repetitive nature? No. Is there much pressure on here? No. And yet, the skills, the only person I can hear in this is the coach. The coach is telling them what to do. And there's other ones coming up where they're being told left hand, right hand. They're being told when to run. They're being told what to do when they run. And again, I'm just asking the question. I'm asking the question, is there a better way that we could actually develop this type of movement in a game where the coach could actually step back and not be the only lone voice? The players aren't talking at all in this. Why? And again, don't get me wrong, they don't need to talk. Why don't they need to talk? They don't need to talk because they've been told when to run, they've been told where to run to, and then they've been told what to do when they get there. So there is no need for communication in a task like this. Now again, I completely accept that I wasn't in that session and I don't have all the details around it, but I'm still putting it out there for consideration of a few elements. It just seems like for me, there's another option. Let's just put it that way. Here's another alternative. Again, let me see. This one isn't working also. So my two of them. not working. Let me move on. And let me see, does this one work? This one does work. This is quick hands. It's been called quick hands. And again, great. Seen this all my life. Actually remember being in one of those bibs myself as a young person. And again, the loudest person out there is the coach, having to motivate them, having to scream and tell them. And if I can maybe hear it better than you guys, but there's a lot of right hand, now left hand. No, don't do this. Now go. No, wait, now go. And I suppose I'm just asking, is that reflective? Is that what they want in the game? Does the coach want to be on the sideline telling the players what to do, when to do it, and how to do it? If they do, well, then this is probably not as bad as I think. Again, someone else will say, yeah, but Ed, this is for fitness. And I said, okay, great, if it's for fitness. But again, is there a better way to get them fit where they're actually making decisions and where they're actually having to figure something out? Because that's what happens in the game. It's decision-making, it's problem-solving. There's not much decision-making going on here. There's not much problem-solving going on here. And again, I'll absolutely accept maybe that's not what this is for. But if it's not what it's for, I go back to my early part of what I was talking about. What I do in my work is to try and increase the fidelity of what we do in practice so that it will transfer to the game. Can we make sure that what we simulate in training is a snapshot of something that happens in the game? So that's where 2v1s, 2v2s, 1v1s, these open dynamic interactions are hugely beneficial. Where there is no set, you have to do this, you've got to run there, then you've got to do this, and then when there, you've got to offload to him, to there, and he will be running out because that's his time to run out. I'm just concerned that there's still a lot of that happening. And we see things like this where there's, huge time and effort. And I can only imagine the time and effort that goes into putting these things together. And I mean it. And again, I would have done a lot of this myself, mapping out the plays, mapping out the order and the structure of each section of a session. And I suppose I'm asking the same question I've asked myself over the years. Is there a way I can get them to the game faster? Is there a way even that I can gamify this? If this is a set drill where it's very clear, red goes to yellow, yellow goes into there to pass over, and then blue comes in and it goes over the bar, red to yellow, blah, 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 over the bar. Great. And again, no problem. And again, it's not a criticism, it's just a challenge. Is there a way we can gamify something like this? Is there a way we can gamify the previous clips so that we can just add in some more decision making in there, some more problem solving in there, while still doing the same thing, even if it is for fitness? Can we gamify it more to bring what they'd expect to experience in the match closer to what they're experiencing in practice? Because again, all of the videos I've shown and these, and I'd like to end for the next one, they're valid. Of course they are. Who am I to say they're not valid? But all I'm just asking for is, are they too rigid? Is there something we can do to gamify them, I suppose is the term I've used, and again, like you see at the end here, the aims are skills and conditioning. Well, my understanding of skills is that their capacity to be able to be proficient and efficiently used in a pressure setting, in a game setting. And they get better the more similar pressure that they experience in practice. And again, that is relative to the age group. So a 10-year-old session, under 11s, the pressure they experience is very different to the pressure I would put into a 15-year-old session, or a 20-year-old session, or a 25-year-old session. But it's still pressure. It's pressure for their level. It's pressure for their standard, their age, and their stage. So the reason I speak to this is that a lot of what I see and I've seen, and a lot of things that have impacted on my own philosophy is from, as I said, from the research. And the research has told us that if we look at the normal session recipe for a coach, there are these three things that come up a lot. In fact, they're constantly coming up. And the evidence behind this is incredibly robust. when we do microstructure of practice research, when we do time motion analysis research, these three things constantly come up. And the younger the age group that is being coached, the more apparent these three things are. Number one, we have coaches who coach to their comfort zone more often than not. So they coach the thing that they maybe were good at as a player. A defensive player will be very good at coaching the defensive work. And yet you, especially at some stages, you might find yourself being the only coach. Well, it's important that they get everything. But also then they'll find things that they like doing in sessions, these comfort things, and that they'll do these more often than not, as opposed to looking at, well, what does the team need? What are the areas that we need to work on? Not the things that I'm just good at coaching, which again goes back to the point about what we're talking about tonight. If you allow the game to unfold, if you allow things and plays that emerge in a game to be in practice, well, then you can actually take a moment back as the coach. You can actually step back and watch and observe. The next thing is repetition. Repetition comes up in so many of these research studies, that there is repetition with repetition. And yet we know that we learn better through variability, repetition without repetition. And yet so much of the training sessions that are done and that are observed through the research would have a lot of the drills that I've already shown, those videos and those cards. And so they're suggesting, the evidence would suggest that overly repetitive drill is less effective and has a weaker transfer to the game. And the final part that seems to come up a lot is emulation. Coaches coaching something that they've seen someone else do. Oh, it's a video clip I've found. I'm a rugby coach and I saw something that the All Blacks would do, so I'm going to do that with my team. Oh, I'm a football coach and I really loved what the Dubs did last year and the success what they've had. And I saw some of their sessions and I'm trying to do mine. And you're like, oh wow, and what team do you work with? I'm with the under-12s. And you're like, well, hang on a second. That's putting a huge amount of pressure on those kids. You're trying to extract something from an elite, a world-class group of coaches and players and translate it down to 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds. But emulation appears to be, the evidence tells us, appears to come up a lot. We see someone doing something we like, and then we want to copy and paste it into our session without maybe asking sufficiently, what was the context behind that? And how can I actually adapt that for my group? Not actually the exact thing, but actually adapt it for my group. And I wonder what process they went through in the lead up to then getting to there. Maybe I should go back and find out what the process I should be doing to find out what will work for our group. So when I think of this, for me, there's a solution. And it's based on principles. It's not the only solution, but it's based on principles. How can I coach less by actually and improve my coaching as I go ahead? And this is a model that I work to, the peak model. I coach, and if someone came and saw me coaching, I'd hope they'd see a lot of this nowadays, and they probably wouldn't have in years gone by. But there's a lot of praise in what I coach, and when I'm coaching, especially at the younger age group. I praise a lot, but I only praise when it's worthy of praise. Because again, there's evidence to suggest that players tune out the white noise they hear. So if I'm constantly saying, well done, go again, go, well done, and go again, yeah, well done, they'll tune it out. Whereas if I'm selective and if I actually see something that was worthy of praise, and then I say, oh, John, that was really nicely done. I saw the pass that you made there, great vision to seek that out, and great effort to put it in there, into that space. And then out again. I've got his attention because I might not have said anything to him for a while because he's in the game. I'm letting him explore in there, which takes me to the next point, explore. I allow time for exploration. I'm a huge fan of setting something up and getting out of the way. Let him explore, let him figure it out. And with the exploration, I have a rule for myself. I call it the 3 shut-up rule. Because again, my former self, I was a talker through the whole session constantly. I was the Mr. Motivator. I was in it. I was just as much in it as everybody else. And I sweat, blood and tears and everything as much as any player because, you know, it's my session. It's not my session. I'm the coach. It's their session. So I have the 3 shut up rule. If I see, if they're playing and they're exploring and I see something, I say, shut up, Ed. Let it go. Because just because it happened once doesn't mean it might happen again. Something else might happen again around the same area, same type of an issue. And I say again, shut up, Ed. And again, I'll say a third time, shut up, Ed. Let it go. Let him explore. Let him see, can they figure it out? If after 4 occasions I'm thinking, okay, this is breaking down, they don't seem to be getting it, yeah, still there, I will then maybe interject. But I'll interject with a question only. I won't interject with the solution. I'll interject with, okay, can I just hold you there a second? Do you think this is working? And if they say, yeah, I think we're getting it, I'm gone again. I'm out. Because maybe they are. Maybe they're getting the sense of this. The affirmation is huge because the affirmation links to the praise. And it also forces me to make sure that when I praise, I'm connecting it to something. Like I said earlier on, great pass, John, to see that and deliver into the corner. But then I might also say, that work you've been doing on your passing, it's coming out, you know? Or great run back there to get that block. That fitness work you're doing is paying off. Fair play to you. It's an affirmation. I'm connecting the praise to something that they've done before. And then as you see the last one, that questioning. It's always about questioning for me, just to challenge them. And the questions I'll ask a 10-year-old are very different to the questions I'll ask a 20-year-old and a 30-year-old and so on and so forth. Very different. And I think if you asked the professional golfers I work for, do I work to this model? I'd hope they'd say, yeah, he actually does. He frustratingly, he doesn't give us the answers. He may change the task if it's too difficult. He may ask us questions, but he largely allows us suffer in it, figure it out. He trusts that we will actually figure it out. He gives us that space to figure it out. So I'd encourage people to explore these principles themselves, you know. Do you praise enough in your sessions? And then when you praise, do you praise too much? Does it just become white noise? Is it distinct enough for them to prick up their ears and be like, oh, thanks, coach. I felt that. That's good, you know? Same with the exploration. Do you give enough time for them to figure things out or not? Affirmation. Do we connect things, connect dots for them and remind them that work you were doing there, that's where it's coming out. Great to see. And so on and so forth with the questioning. So for me, this is a quote that I remember friends of mine, Sean and Ross, sent me a few years ago, and it has stayed with me since. The question is the answer, the problem is the solution. It is a constant in my mind now. My job, I see as a coach, is to not coach every single part of the session. My job is ask a good enough question that might lead them to an answer. So that question that I ask has to be really good, which then goes back to my shut up rule. If I'm encouraging myself to stay silent more in a training session, then it actually gives me more time to come up with something that should be more meaningful and more impactful when I do speak. I want their attention to be focused on what I say when I say it. Because if I'm expecting them to attend to me all the time, constantly, if I'm talking constantly, I have no control of what they're going to listen to then, because it's just going to turn into white noise. And that last part, the problem is the solution. Again, my job is to create problems that they have to solve. If it's not working, make the problem easier. If they get it too easy, make the problem more difficult. But resist the temptation to give them a solution. Resist the temptation. And again, it's to go back to those videos. Are there much questions that the players have to answer in that? I don't think so. And maybe there are. And if there are, I'll put my hand up. Are there many problems that they're having to figure out and solve in those drills and those lesson plans? Again, I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure. And for me, it then goes away, if we can get into this place of coaching, where we're really conscious of what we say and when we say it. because we've allowed them time to explore. We've allowed them time to figure things out. It becomes less about coaching and becomes more about coaxing for me. That idea that we're actually coaxing them through the session. That idea that they come to the end of the session, and I want players, I would love for players to feel like it was their session tonight. That they walk off saying, oh, I really like the game we came up with there. And for me to be like, brilliant. And have nothing about, well, actually, that was my game. No, it was your game. Of course it was your game. It's your session. It was your session. And that sense of autonomy, that sense of ownership. And it is never too late to start this. If you're working with 14-year-olds, start now. Because a year from now, they'll already have a year of it and they'll be 15. Think about 6 years from now when they're under 20s. Imagine players, imagine if our under 20s in Cork had 6 years of problem solving, decision making in their training, of autonomy, of ownership, of feeding into what the content of the session would be like and should be like and how they want it delivered. I think it would create a very different type of animal. Interestingly, on that point, I know the boys who take the Cork under 20s and Keith Ricken and his crew. It's fascinating to watch Keith coach because a lot of it is around the space that we're talking about here. So that's no accident either. So to wrap up, I've just put some resources for people. I'm always asked, Ed, what should I listen to? And I said, look, I don't know. I know what I listen to, and this is a snapshot. I listen to these guys. I listen to these guys. I kind of help out with some of the movements collectors in Ireland stuff, and there's many others. But also from a resources perspective, I show them that there's evidence behind everything of all this. Never stop that learning. And going back to that Mr. CPD happy image, learn with an intention. Don't learn just for the sake of learning. Go into something, read a book, and be reading, how can I apply this? How can I apply this? How will this impact on my coaching? The very next night I go out, the next night, I want this page. I've only read 5 pages of the book, but those 5 pages, I want them to impact on what I do the next night. More and more and more and more and more. It's everywhere. And I say this, and I do want it to feel like I'm hammering you over the head with a hammer, because it is important that people realize, and I didn't realize this, but there are people who are committing their entire careers to help us be better at coaching. We owe it to the athletes we work with that we stay up to date with this, that we engage with this, that we try and follow some of this. And again, if you don't have the time to read this stuff, great, but try and connect with someone who does. And I put my own hand up there. Check in with me. That book, and I don't have time to, what would you say about this? Or connect with some of my postgrads in CIT. Connect with some of the staff in CIT. Go to some of the guys in UCC. That's the beauty of Cork, and I mean that. People don't realize the collaboration and the connectedness that we have with the sports department in UCC and between CIT and UCC. Maybe on the pitch we're rivals, but I can tell you academically and from a research perspective, we're collaborators. And I can't speak highly enough about the work that they do, and equally for the work that we do. But I also equally know that they are open for people to knock on their door and say, I saw this and I saw Ed Coughlan saying something, and I don't like him, but I kind of heard something he said. But I do like you. Could I talk to you about it? He gives me a bit of a pain in the backside. Do you mind if I talk to you? And great. Come and talk to some of the postgrads inside. Alan Dunton, Kevin Smith, Kevin Murray, Sam German, some of the staff, Con Burns, Tom Broderick, Wesley in UCC, Ian Lester. It's so important that we connect outside of our group, and go to what the evidence tells us. And because it's everywhere. Oh, and there's another slide. I thought I was done. There's another slide, even more journals. So with that, I think that's the last one. So with that, look, I'd like to just say thank you to Colum and all the stuff that they do within the Rebel Oak. I know in CIT, we're only too delighted to be partners with you guys in the research that we're doing with Kevin Murray through Kevin O'Callaghan and Conor Coonhan. And And yeah, more than happy for people to connect and get on to me and tell me I'm full of rubbish and don't like what I heard, don't like what I saw, and because you know what, that will make me a better coach too. I'm on Twitter if people are interested in kind of seeing what I post up there, and that's just my personal email there. So I hope something might be from there. You know,
excellent stuff. It was really interesting stuff there. And look, I know you've gone through so much, but I just want to ask you one or two real quick ones. And keep them to 30 seconds though, because look, as I said, you've been excellent with your time, and I don't want to be taking any more of your evening. But one, it actually came up in a podcast I was recording last night, and somebody mentioned about a coach that Mayo had back in the day, and he was getting them to brush their teeth with the left hand, and I said it was probably Ed Coughlan. Am I right?
Yeah, that was me.
And can you give a quick what's the thinking behind that? Just
so the thinking behind that, and the thinking behind that was the idea that for us to change a behavior, we need to put our everything into it. So if I'm working with a player who, and again, just to remind people, back in that time, I was very much only in charge of the strength and conditioning. Some of that stuff kind of came out of some conversations when players kind of began to realize my area of interest was in skill acquisition. And one of the guys that said, one of the players, and it became a few of the players, was talking to me. He said, look, you know, I need to be better off my other side, both hand passing and kick passing. And I was like, okay, well, we can work on that. And I set up a variety of different tasks. They were never in discrete ways. They were always more in with another person playing against them, or even a 2v2 or 2v1, 1v2, so on and so forth. But I said, but also what you've got to try and do, you've got to let your whole body know that there's another side to your skill set. And I was like, so everything. I said, I want you to go home, and I want you, tomorrow morning when you get up, I want you to eat your cereal with your other hand. I want you to butter your toast with your other hand. I want you to brush your teeth with your other hand, because I want it to be a shock to the system to realize, because again, the neuroscience tells us, the way our brain works, it's in hemispheres. One side of our brain will work largely, this is quite general terms, but will largely work the other side of the body. And then the other one side, so right side will monitor and work the motor actions on the left side, and vice versa. But also we know from fMRI imaging that if I actually work on, there's something called bilateral transfer. If I actually work on a non-dominant sided skill, well, the brain actually lights up in the same way as it does when I'm working the dominant skill. So there is actually this, because the brain actually needs to send those signals over, because those signals have been used on that side of the brain, so it sends it over. So then not only do you get lights lighting up on one side of the brain because it hasn't been ever, but you also get those lights lighting up on the side that also has been used very often. And bilateral transfer is a huge part of skill acquisition. It's an incredible part, but it's ignored largely. I think that's 30 seconds.
That's about that, yeah. No, it was, as I said, it was set in a positive light. We were actually discussing Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid and how he got him to do everything, wax on, wax off, and everything he did was left hand and right hand.
Implicit learning.
Yeah.
One of the greatest movies for skill acquisition ever. Like, what a movie. It's skill acquisition 101. You're doing it and you're learning by not knowing how you're learning, so you don't have any schema to kind of confuse you when you're under pressure. You become reactive. Great movie.
I should have spoke to you when I was talking about it, because you made a lot more sense there now than I tried to last night. The second question then, and again, just I know it was something I actually messaged you about it before, but I never followed up with you again, about streaming teams to their ability. So like the GA has always been about trying to win the county, and you play your best 15 players. But down the line, I suppose we would have had our kind of 10s can go A and B. This year we pushed it to 11s can go A and B. We wanted our 9s and 10s going equally picked. But as regards even on a lesser scale, let's say in a training session, what should we be trying to do in that sphere, let's say?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because it's such a pertinent topic at the moment. I'm a huge fan of fighting against streaming and just making us realize about the negative knock-on effects. What might look good as a sugar rush short-term acute effect is not good long-term. It's just not good. And look, I'm a Liverpool fan, and I was fortunate enough then to live there. My two boys were born there, so I have two Scousers in the house here, and they're running around with their. But it's incredible to see just the idea, let's say, of streaming. Let's say, for example, when I think of Liverpool, I look at a team now, which we're very fortunate. We've got a good team at the moment, but they're not all at the same level. Virgil van Dijk is the best player in the world in his position, but not everyone else in the team is the best player in the world in their position. So even at the highest level of football, we have mixed ability. In fact, there's vast mixed ability. In fact, and I have friends of mine who are Manchester United supporters who they'll scream blind. Some of their players are just nowhere near the level, and they're just this, that, and the other. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting, because that happens in every kind of sport. But we tend to think, get all the best players playing together because that's going to make them better. Again, the evidence doesn't support that. It actually doesn't support that. And I go back to even recently, all the talk around the Last Dance with Michael Jordan and the Bulls, that famous Bulls team, and the three in a row. Michael Jordan, and I remember watching that live. That was a sport I loved as a kid. Like, I remember watching that footage, waking up in the middle of the night to watch that stuff. But Michael Jordan, if anyone's read any Phil Jackson's books or anything like that, you'll see that Michael Jordan was a world-class player before Phil Jackson came. But they were never winning anything unless Michael Jordan changed. Unless Michael Jordan began to play with others. Unless he brought others into the game. And I know we saw, a side of him in the Last Dance. But again, it was fundamentally about him realizing that, Michael, we can win a lot of games with you just taking over, but we will not win all games. We will not win the last game of the season if you constantly just do it your way. You've got to bring other guys into the game. You've got to make them better. You've got to, and again, we saw great insights in that. But there's so many more positives for keeping them with their group of all abilities. And some sports are diabolical at it. Soccer is absolutely atrocious for their streaming. And I'm a coach in soccer for my boys, and it's a constant bone of contention for me. Their national governing body doesn't help, because they are going against so many other European nations within UEFA. And again, and that's where I think the GAA have a huge part to play, in that we've such autonomy with our sport, with such reach in our sport. We could have major impact in a very short space of time with the size of our country to actually change things for the better. And I think one of those things would be to knock out streaming, to knock out this idea of A's and B's and so on and so forth, to randomize selection, to be more aware of the relative age effect and the age groups that kids are born. Because even recent studies within the GAA, the relative age effect is alive and well in the GAA. How is that still happening in the year 2020? That if we look at senior inter-county hurling and football, ladies football and camogie teams, that the vast majority of players are born in the first half of the year, because they've been selected based on their maturity, not based on their ability. They've been selected based on the fact that, and again, there are other things. There's the sibling bias. Are they younger siblings and so on and so forth? And there's environmental bias. But the outstanding one consistently is that relative age effect. There shouldn't be such a stark relative age effect within the GAA, especially all these years on from that early research. And it's been done now in about 30 different sports, in about 150 different research studies that keep coming back to the same answer. Stop. Take stock of who is in your group, who are born in the first quartile, the second quartile, the third quartile, the fourth quartile. Mix them up. Be aware of those older kids so that you are aware of your selection. Whoa, hang on. I keep looking at him and I keep being amazed at what he's doing. But he's also the eldest kid here. He's born in January. He's born in February. And I keep being critical of this kid over here. And he's born in November and he's born in December. So maybe just awareness alone of these things can have a big impact on how we engage with these kids. So to wrap up my 30 seconds, I'd be saying, say no to streaming. Fight the urge to stream. And your job as a coach, if you're dealing with underage and youths, is not actually to win it all. They're competitive. I have 2 hugely competitive kids downstairs, 7 and 11. They didn't lick it off the floor. Okay? I'm a very competitive individual myself. But I don't need someone to be competitive for me. And especially at a young age, we don't. They're competitive. Allow that competitive nature to come out and encourage it within what you're doing. Great. But it should be on their terms and not yours. You know, it should be on their terms.
Yeah, it's a brilliant answer, and it's something I'd very much agree with, in that as regards kids are going to be competitive, but instead if us coaches on the sideline are being competitive as well, that's where it falls down a small bit.
There's another point on that, if I may, just for a second. There's another point on that. I see a lot of this Player of the Year awards and the like. Okay, and again, we're adopting this stuff from adults. You know, I love the idea of a player's player. Let the kids have they'll chat amongst themselves. They'll talk about it and let them pick somebody out of their peer group. Great. But as coaches that we choose one player of a child population, and remember, child population is up to 18 years of age, that we pick one player, I just find it abhorrent. And I did it myself. But nowadays I'm much more inclined to say, well, you know what I'm going to do? We're going to set up awards for every player, but it's not going to be in the pithy, everyone gets a medal. That's nonsense too. They'll see through that. But it's in this case of, well, you know what? This year you made a significant contribution to us because you were fantastic. Our best winger all year was you. Our best passer of the ball was you. You stood out for your passing ability. You stood out for your creating space. You stood out for your encouragement. You stood out for your ability to encourage. Again, you stood out for how you handled being dropped. Maybe even there's 100,000 different things that you could pick that would be a form of a boost to a child, because they look to the coaches. They look to the coaches as, I wonder how I'm doing. He or she is watching me. How am I doing? And then at the end of the season, we say, well, thanks very much. We think he or she did better than all of you. Yet in coaching, in sports like gymnastics, where you're actually taught about judging, you're taught, because it's a subjective sport, like diving, you're taught to actually become a judge in these. There is significant training to improve your capacity to judge movements, to judge performance. It's not in GAA, soccer, rugby, hurling, football, basketball, tennis. It isn't. So we have no training on how to make these judgments. So they all become these arbitrary judgments that are massively influenced by our bias, because maybe he's just a nice kid. How many times does the kid who maybe challenges you just that little bit too much, who challenges your patience, who pushes your buttons that bit off too much, how many times do they get the Player of the Year? Hardly. Maybe they always do. I don't know. But I think bias feeds into all that. And I think that's, again, something that we can do better as coaches, and people like you, coach educators, can do better. Let's remove that idea of the best at a kid's age. Let's create a place where my actually job as a coach is to find out what's their weapon, what's their superpower. They love these superpowers and superheroes. What's their superpower? You know what your superpower is for us this year? And it was amazing. And of course, you've got other things to work on. But it was incredible. Your crossing this year for us was incredible. Your overhead catching for us was incredible this year. And that's it. And does that require a little bit more time from the coach? Yeah. Well, you know what? It's your gig. It is a job. It is. You may not be paid for it, but it's such an important job, especially when they're children, and especially when they're underage. And I go back to days when I coached in another way, and I'm embarrassed, Colm. I'm embarrassed by my conduct. I'm mortified by some of the things I would have said to players in the past. And I mean it, like, out of line, disrespectful.
I think,
and it's still happening.
Yeah, I think any coach who's a willingness to reflect will say the exact same thing as you. And like one that sticks with me now before we finish up was Brian Cuthbert, when I was chatting to him before the COVID lockdown, and he said, like, there was a couple of players that were minor footballers with him, and he said if you seen them on a day-to-day, and they came up and boxed them, he'd say they were within their right. But as a coach, to be able to acknowledge that and to be able to advance and constantly evolve is very, very important. Ed,
you speak about a reflective coach there. You look at Brian and the work he did in his PhD. Yeah. Some of the holistic, the ecological athlete development framework that he presented from Henrik Christoffersen, that is literally game-changing research from that Henriksen was presenting, that he works to in Denmark. That's what Brian was presenting in his research. We have an organization, the GAA in this country, small enough to actually put that into practice. It wouldn't take much. It would take a huge amount, but it also wouldn't take much. You know, we're small enough and widespread enough for someone's PhD that raises that flag so much to say, well, let's put it in place. This is evidence-based research on a holistic approach to athlete development. Why aren't we doing it?
It's a question for the next day. Ed, look, we're going to leave it there. I just want to say thanks very much for your time, and like your contact is there. If anyone starts bothering you, you've drawn it on yourself. So I just want to say thanks very much.
Not at all. Thank you.